In this drawing, I'm going to take us through how to make a quick line of action gesture drawing, and then how to start looking for some of the big skeletal anatomical features of the body in a sketch. But first, you'll notice I'm making some sweeping lines that cut down, and basically with this blocking in of the figure, I'm looking both at outside edges and also subjective lines of action where I feel like the sweep of the arm would curve something like that to just place basically more or less the figure on the page. Next thing I want to do is start to look for structure, and that line I'm drawing is the sternum of the rib cage. And that tells me, that it's pretty much the position of the rib cage under there. I'm outlining the top of the clavicles, and then just jotting in a kind of a cylindrical shape for the neck and a little bit of notation for the head, and I can come back later to flesh that out. But basically, we're looking really for the skeletal features, so the skull and then the rib cage here. Now, that's the thoracic arch there. That's that arched part that everyone has in the front part of the rib cage. And the important part about finding the sternum first is then you can see how the edges on either side, and you can kind of see them poke on the figure. This, even under the musculature of this model, you can spot where right under the surface the rib cage, comes right under the skin in a few places on the side. Now, I'm doing a quick trace in of the pectoral muscles, and I'm noting that they attach to the sternum on one end, and then they stretch over to attach at the upper arm, and then they also connect to the ribs and the clavicles. Now, that little sweeping line I'm doing is called the front line of the body, the linea alba, and on the model it's very clearly defined because of his really well developed abdominal muscles. And I'm using to place the hips, I'm basically just using the elastic of the cloth of the model's fabric, and that kind of can tell me how that, the mouth of the pelvic bone is basically, it's like a bowl shape, which, I'm kind of tracing in there with the edges being the big kind of arched sides of the pelvic bone, and then it would kind of dip down. So it's a complex shape, and sometimes it helps for me to visualize it like a bowl, essentially. And then I'm using both the outside edges of the musculature of the leg, but I'm also cutting through where I find a rhythm that I can pull in, and also kind of overtly making the ankle a cylindrical shape that allows me to then catch a little bit with emphasis on the heel, which is also a skeletal feature, and then I might put something for the arch of the foot. And then I can continue finding the rhythms in the musculature on the outside curves, and then following them in and out, and I can link up with lines like on the shin where the leg bone and the foot appear. Now, I'm going to emphasize a little bit of the deltoid muscle in the bicep, and I want to note basically the position of the forearm being kind of cylindrical, and also more the outside mass of the fist, of the hand, and I'll trace basically where the outside fingertips would line up. They kind of generally form an arc-like shape, and I'll include the thumb, and then I can, if I have time, I can go back and I'm kind of dividing it up there, which is probably a little too big, but just to block it in quickly for the purposes of the gesture. And we can finish up on the other side with the outstretched arm. So this is just a hybrid little sketch of starting with a gestural drawing to lay out the figure, and then the second step is to look for those skeletal features like the sternum if it's visible, just the back of the skull, because that will tell you kind of the position of the head, and also look for where visible the hip tilt, and look for those arched parts of they're called the iliac crests that come up under, in the hip area. And then to finish it off, I'll just make a little rough notation for the position of the hand.